In 1940, federal inspectors looked at this ship and saw only a floating coffin, a death trap of rotting wood destined for the scrapyard. Yet, in less than a year, that same condemned wreck became the most technologically advanced luxury palace on the Great Lakes. How does a vessel deemed a fire hazard by the government suddenly transform into a defiant monument of engineering, outlasting the very ships that were built to replace it? Beneath these rusted plates lies a story of legal warfare, narrow escapes from total destruction, and a design philosophy that flatly rejected the industry's rush to modernize. Today, we are not merely visiting a museum. We are deconstructing a blueprint of sheer survival. If this ship was legally condemned by 1940, what forces both engineering brilliance and human sheer will defy the inevitable to grant her a second century of life? Join me, my crew, as we venture into the hollowed, steel-ribbed decks of the SS Milwaukee Clipper to decipher the hidden mechanics of her resilience. And I promise, the truth is far more complex than any history book could tell. Stick with me through this entire journey to witness the moment this vessel defied physics and changed the fate of the Great Lakes forever. The dawn of the 20th century was an era defined by a unique form of industrial audacity, and nowhere was this ambition more palpably felt than on the Great Lakes, which served as the pulsating, throbbing industrial arteries of a burgeoning American superpower. It was within this hyper-competitive crucible of commerce and bold engineering innovation that the SS Juniata was birthed on the 17th of December 1904 at the American Shipbuilding Company in Cleveland, Ohio. Commissioned for the Erie and Western Transportation Company, commonly known as the Anchor Line, the Juniata served as the prestigious passenger and freight arm of the Pennsylvania Railroad. She was never intended to be merely a functional vessel. She was conceived as a profound statement of corporate and national capability. The Juniata was an engineering marvel for her time, measuring 361 feet in length and 45 feet in breadth, with a gross tonnage of 4,333 tons. She was a dominant presence on the water. Built with a riveted steel hull and a traditional wooden superstructure, she joined a distinguished sisterhood of vessels, including the SS Tionesta 1902, and later the SS Octorara 1910. In her original configuration, she was capable of transporting 350 passengers in opulent staterooms at a cruising speed of 13.5 knots. As the United States surged aggressively toward a modernity defined by speed and efficiency, the Pennsylvania Railroad issued a mandate. They required a flagship that could seamlessly bridge the immense gap between the ruthless, clockwork precision of American rail travel and the burgeoning, insatiable public appetite for refined, leisure-based maritime luxury. She was meticulously designed for the premier route of the era, the long, majestic, and arduous journey from Buffalo, New York, to Duluth, Minnesota. For years, the Juniata reigned supreme as the sophisticated, essential link for transcontinental travelers, representing the absolute glittering zenith of Edwardian elegance. Her interiors were a marvel of intricate craftsmanship, featuring opulent dining halls that served gourmet cuisine, velvet-lined lounges that echoed with the chatter of the elite, and stateroom comforts that legitimately rivaled the finest transatlantic ocean liners of that golden age. She was the undisputed pride of the lakes, a floating sanctuary of high society, cruising serenely through the industrial heart of the American Midwest, serving the Pennsylvania Railroad's travel network with unparalleled grace until 1915. However, To truly understand the Juniata and the deep existential crisis that would eventually define her legacy, one must first learn to respect the master she served, the Great Lakes themselves. The Great Lakes, particularly the treacherous, unforgiving passage across the upper basins, are not merely bodies of water. They are a complex, often lethal meteorological trap. The entire region is governed by rapidly shifting barometric pressure, sudden, violent gale-force winds that can turn calm water into a churning cauldron in minutes, and the notoriously short, steep, and punishing waves that are entirely unique to these inland seas. These waters demand a vessel that is far more than aesthetically pleasing. They demand a structural integrity that borders on the absolute. During this era, the Juniata's design, a hybrid construction featuring a rigid steel hull below the waterline and a traditional, intricate, and beautiful wooden superstructure above, was the universally accepted industry standard. Yet, this architecture harbored a hidden, existential vulnerability that would not be apparent for years. The volatile climate, characterized by the biting, cold, dry air of the lake winters and the relentless, compounding physical stress of navigating seasonal, punishing storms, placed a constant, invisible, and destructive strain on the meticulous wood joinery of her decks, cabins, and bulkheads. Over the course of 3 decades, the harsh environment that defined the lakes became a slow-acting, relentless adversary, testing the fundamental limits of her original construction in ways her 1904 designers had never fully anticipated or understood. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, the tides of fortune began to shift violently and irrevocably against the Juniata. The onset of the Great Depression did not merely collapse the national economy in a financial sense. It systematically dismantled the passenger steamship business, which was a luxury service that relied entirely on the surplus capital and carefree confidence of the middle and upper classes. As the convenience of the mass-produced automobile flourished and the terrifying, revolutionary speed of burgeoning air travel began to capture the public imagination, the slow, romantic, and increasingly costly pace of the anchor line became a quaint artifact of a bygone world. The Juniata suddenly found herself facing a catastrophic dual crisis, a rapidly dwindling passenger manifest that could no longer justify her operation, and an aging, increasingly expensive infrastructure that required constant, prohibitive maintenance. She was quickly becoming a relic of a dying industrial age, a majestic vessel without a mission, waiting for the inevitable, singular catalyst that would finally push her toward the dark, cold finality of the scrap pile. That catalyst arrived on the morning of the 8th of September 1934, in the form of the horrific SS Morro Castle disaster off the coast of New Jersey. The fire that consumed the Morro Castle was a gruesome national spectacle that claimed 137 lives and seared itself into the collective consciousness of the American public. It exposed the fatal, systemic flaw of the entire maritime era. Wooden superstructures were nothing more than massive amounts of kindling waiting for a singular, tragic spark to ignite. The federal government's response was immediate, draconian, and absolute. New, stringent maritime safety regulations specifically regarding the mandatory use of fire-resistant materials and the implementation of heavy-duty, internal subdivision bulkheads were codified into federal law. This was the metaphorical slap across the face that changed everything for the global maritime industry. For the Juniata, these regulations were an effective death warrant. Her intricate, beautiful wooden architecture, which had once stood as a proud symbol of maritime refinement and traditional craftsmanship, was now officially classified by the state as a profound, unacceptable fire hazard. By the late 1930s, she was grounded, stripped of her purpose, and tethered to the docks, seemingly destined for the cold, unfeeling blowtorches of the scrapyard. She had successfully survived 30 years of brutal lake storms, immense ice flows, and economic upheaval, only to be defeated in the end by a single, powerful, and unyielding piece of paper: the new federal code. The Juniata had become a ghost of her former self, a vessel caught in a legal purgatory, awaiting the final judgment that would either consign her to the anonymity of history or demand a transformation that no one, not even her most optimistic supporters, thought was physically or economically possible. She stood as a silent testament to the rapid pace of change, a ship built for a world that no longer existed, tethered to a dock by the very laws designed to keep travelers safe. By 1940, the SS Juniata languished as little more than a ghost ship, a legal pariah, rotting in the stagnant shadow of a rapidly evolving and unforgiving regulatory landscape. Yet, where the collective eyes of the industry saw only a rotting hull destined for the furnace of the scrapyard, one man perceived a foundational opportunity. Max B. McKee, the visionary and often unconventional head of the Sand Products Corporation, stepped into this atmosphere of maritime decay with a gamble that stunned his contemporaries. To those observing in 1940, at the very dawn of a global conflict where industrial steel was rapidly becoming the world's most precious hoarded commodity, McKee's decision to purchase this obsolete firetrap of a vessel seemed like pure, unadulterated madness. It invited the question: was this the act of a reckless gambler blinded by hubris, or was it a cold, calculating economic gambit? McKee understood a fundamental market reality that his rivals were too cautious to grasp. The passenger trade on the Great Lakes was not dying. It was simply hibernating, waiting for a modern, bold incarnation. In late 1940, the Juniata was towed to the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company, a yard renowned across the entire Midwest for its absolute, uncompromising technical precision. What followed was a total, industrial-scale metamorphosis that would redefine the ship's very identity. To satisfy the draconian, newly mandated federal safety codes that had been sparked by the horrific Morro Castle disaster, the engineers embarked on a structural overhaul of unprecedented ambition. They systematically stripped away the fire-prone, ornate wooden superstructure all the way down to the raw steel main deck, a massive, surgically precise undertaking that fundamentally altered the ship's inherent physics. By replacing the heavy, combustible timber with high-tensile, fire-resistant steel plating, the engineering team faced a complex, high-stakes puzzle of weight distribution. They had to meticulously recalculate the vessel's center of gravity. This was not merely about swapping materials, it was about maintaining a delicate balance of stability while simultaneously increasing the ship's top-heavy steel profile. Through ingenious ballast management, the lowering of interior centerlines, and the installation of custom reinforced interior bulkheads, they managed to stabilize her, effectively improving her sea-keeping capabilities and rendering her far more resilient to the sudden, violent storms that define the Great Lakes. The modernization reached deep into her mechanical heart, stripping away the inefficient past to build a more productive future. The original coal-fired boilers, which had required a small army of sweating firemen to shovel tons of coal and produced a constant, stifling haze of soot across the passenger decks, were ripped out entirely. In their place, the team installed state-of-the-art oil-fired boilers. This was a masterstroke of maritime efficiency. It drastically reduced the engine room crew requirements, freed up vast, previously unusable storage space for cargo and amenities, and dramatically increased her operational range and thermal efficiency. As the ship took shape within the protective confines of the shipyard, the visual transition was stark and undeniably striking. If you were to examine a technical cross-sectional diagram comparing the original 1904 Juniata to the newly engineered 1941 vessel, you would see a clean, aerodynamic silhouette that spoke of a new era, an Art Deco masterpiece rendered in cold, resilient steel. The interior transformation was equally comprehensive, reflecting the changing cultural landscape of mid-century America. Gone were the stuffy, overly ornate Victorian aesthetics that had defined the Edwardian era. In their place, McKee introduced the sleek, functional elegance of the Art Deco movement. He demanded a floating resort, a concept that required a radical redesign of passenger flow, luxury, and comfort. The new ship featured a high-tech, state-of-the-art movie theater, a grand ballroom designed for the jitterbug and jazz, and streamlined, innovative aluminum tube furniture specifically created by the legendary designer Warren McArthur. This represented the absolute cutting edge of 1940s luxury, bringing a level of sophistication and modern comfort to the Great Lakes that had never before been seen in commercial passenger shipping. It was a statement of intent. The Clipper was designed to provide a sanctuary of style in a world on the brink of war. Finally, on the 2nd of June 1941, the transformation and reached its magnificent pinnacle. Patricia McKee, the daughter of Max McKee, performed the solemn christening ceremony. As the bottle shattered against the reinforced, freshly painted bow, the SS Juniata effectively ceased to exist, both in name and in spirit. In her place stood the SS Milwaukee Clipper. She was no longer just a steamship. She was a profound technological rebuttal to the federal regulators, a defiant, shimmering symbol of American industrial recovery, and a vessel perfectly poised to redefine the passenger experience on the Great Lakes for the next 30 years. She was a living bridge between the craftsmanship of the past and the industrial might of the future, a ship reborn from the literal fires of regulatory extinction to become the undisputed queen of the lakes. She stood as proof that with enough vision, steel, and engineering grit, even the most condemned relics could be salvaged, redesigned, and elevated into the stuff of legend. Her rebirth at Manitowoc was an act of defiance against the inevitability of the scrap heap. By 1941, the SS Milwaukee Clipper had rapidly solidified her position as the pulsating, indispensable heartbeat of the vital cross-lake transportation corridor connecting Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Muskegon, Michigan. For the 3 remarkable decades that followed, she evolved into something far more significant and profound than a standard utility ferry. She became an enduring, shimmering icon of Great Lakes leisure and a powerful, living testament to the resilience of the American mid-century spirit. Yet, beneath the polished, refined veneer of her Art Deco glamour and the steady, rhythmic, and reassuring hum of her upgraded oil-fired engines, the Clipper operated within a complex world defined by profound, often contradictory paradoxes. For the grizzled crew members who had spent their formative years serving aboard her wooden predecessor, the SS Juniata, the transition was both psychologically and physically jarring. The nostalgic warmth, the organic resonance, and the familiar creak of the old timber decks had been permanently and abruptly replaced by the sterile, utilitarian, and imposing strength of cold, industrial-grade steel. While many of the older crewmen initially perceived this new, clinical environment with a deep sense of detachment or even suspicion, these seasoned sailors eventually came to appreciate the stark, undeniable reality of their situation. It was the coldness of absolute, unyielding security. They understood with a profound clarity that only comes from years of battling the inland seas that hidden securely behind those heavy, meticulously riveted steel bulkheads lay a comprehensive, life-saving level of fire protection and structural integrity that rendered the older, traditional wooden steamers of the era which had once been the celebrated pride of the entire Great Lakes fleet as nothing more than floating, perilous, and highly combustible tinderboxes. However, this celebrated golden age for the Clipper was far from a smooth, uneventful cruise through tranquil waters. Her most famous chapter, and undeniably the most controversial segment of her long career, centered on a high-stakes, dramatic, and at times hilarious dance with state law regarding the legal nuances of gambling on the lake. When the Clipper navigated into the expansive center of Lake Michigan, crossing the invisible, legally significant state lines, she effectively entered a contested, murky legal no man's land. Max McKee and his shrewd, opportunistic management team masterfully exploited this jurisdictional loophole to operate a fully functional, high-stakes casino on board, catering to the wealthy and the restless alike. It was a calculated, brilliant masterclass in navigating the shifting, often murky gray zones of American administrative law. While luxury passengers spent their balmy evenings sipping expensive cocktails and pulling the levers on rows of glowing slot machines, the state of Michigan was embroiled in a legislative frenzy, desperately attempting to assert authority and prove they possessed the ironclad jurisdiction required to shutter this floating casino. This ongoing, high-pressure legal warfare became a staple of the Clipper's growing legend, serving as definitive, public proof that she was not merely a passive transport vessel, but a defiant, mobile rebel that thrived within the overlooked technical gaps of the American justice system. As the nation plunged into the existential, life-altering crisis of World War II, the Clipper demonstrated an unexpected, yet vital level of operational versatility that further cemented her importance. She ceased to be just a recreational vessel for weekend tourists. Instead, she transformed into a crucial logistical link in the regional infrastructure, transporting critical defense materials, essential supplies, and thousands of tired, dedicated factory workers across the lake to ensure that the arsenal of democracy remained fully operational and productive. She was essentially performing the grueling, heavy lifting of a hardened wartime machine while simultaneously maintaining the sophisticated, outward facade of a refined luxury liner. But the Great Lakes, in their majestic indifference, are a notoriously cruel master, and they granted the Clipper no special favors for her dedicated service. In 1949, she suffered a sobering, violent blow when a powerful, unpredicted gale forced her into a hard, catastrophic collision with the concrete pier at Milwaukee. The massive impact shattered her heavy, reinforced rudder and mangled her massive propellers, leaving her crippled, helpless, and adrift in the harbor. It served as a stark, unforgiving reminder to all who sailed her that no matter how much industrial steel you wrap a vessel in, or how meticulously you engineer her bulkheads, the raw, unpredictable, and savage power of a Lake Michigan storm remains the ultimate, final, and inescapable benchmark of maritime survival. When we look back at the Clipper through the analytical lens of modern history, we are forced to compare her legacy to the tragic events that followed in the decades after her decommissioning. Years later, the haunting, sudden, and widely mourned loss of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a massive, state-of-the-art ore carrier equipped with modern radar, GPS, and advanced metallurgy, would shock the entire world, serving as a brutal reminder that even with all our technological arrogance, the Great Lakes remain essentially unconquerable. The Clipper, by sharp contrast, had survived her tenure because she was painstakingly constructed to the stringent post-Morro Castle safety standards that prioritized internal subdivision, compartmentalization, and rigorous manual fire control concepts that were perhaps neglected, misunderstood, or simply overwhelmed in later, more modern disasters. Her extraordinary durability was not an accident of fate. It was the direct, measurable testament to the rigorous, proactive safety engineering that had been implemented during her 1941 resurrection at Manitowoc. She stood as a bridge between the reckless, wooden past and a future that finally learned the hard way to fear the water, carrying the visible, textured scars of her own storms, both the relentless legal battles in the courts and the physical collisions against the unyielding concrete piers. She remains an indelible badge of a life lived on the absolute razor-thin edge of possibility. She proves that in the harsh, competitive theater of the Great Lakes, true longevity is earned through high-quality steel, long-term foresight, and a defiant, unwavering refusal to sink into the abyss. She was and remains the Queen of the Lakes, not because she was the biggest or the fastest, but because she possessed the soul of a survivor in an age of change. By the late 1960s, the maritime landscape of the Great Lakes was shifting with a tectonic and irreversible inevitability, and the SS Milwaukee Clipper, once the undisputed and regal queen of the cross-lake passenger routes, suddenly found herself confronting a new, existential kind of obsolescence. The rise of more efficient, highly specialized, and economically superior vehicle ferries, most notably the SS Badger, which was formally commissioned in 1953, signaled the definitive and somber end of an era for the grand old steamship. The Badger was a vessel purpose-built for the brutal, cold-blooded demands of a rapidly changing mid-century economy, boasting vastly larger load capacities and superior operational efficiencies that the Clipper, despite the sheer, inspired ingenuity of her radical 1,941 refit, simply could no longer match in a cutthroat competitive market. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the golden echo of laughter in her grand ballroom began to fade into memory. The warm, vibrant neon glow of her Art Deco lounges dimmed into melancholic shadow, and the grand old lady of the lakes was gradually pushed to the lonely periphery of the Muskegon docks. Her vibrant, decades-long life as a bustling, high-energy passenger vessel quietly drew to a poignant close in 1970, leaving her moored in the profound, eerie stillness of a world that had moved on to faster, more clinical, and utilitarian modes of mass transit. Yet, history possesses an uncanny, defiant way of refusing to let certain legends simply vanish into the ether of forgotten time. The decades that followed her formal retirement were a grueling, multi-generational test of human patience, fiscal purpose, and the fragility of collective memory. Transitioning from a powerful, working vessel into a stationary museum ship was an arduous, complex journey, a transformation that proved to be just as technically and administratively challenging as her initial 1,941 conversion from wood to steel had been. Today, walking through her hollowed, silent, and cavernous corridors is a truly visceral experience that defies mere observation. A close-up, painstaking inspection of her decks, bulkheads, and mechanical spaces reveals the grueling daily reality of modern maritime preservation. The tireless, largely volunteer-led efforts to combat the relentless, unrelenting, and natural march of oxidation, rust, and entropy. Deep within her bowels, the massive, silent machinery that once powered her across the violent waters of Lake Michigan now stands as a frozen, magnificent, and silent monument to 1940s engineering prowess. Every rusted rivet, every worn brass gauge, and every reinforced steel bulkhead tells the profound, interconnected story of an era where ships were not merely utilitarian tools for trade, but the absolute, shimmering pride of an industrial nation that viewed itself as invincible. Why does the preservation of this specific vessel matter so deeply in the grand, sweeping narrative of American history? The SS Milwaukee Clipper is not merely a static, dusty exhibit or a quaint tourist curiosity. She is the last surviving, tangible representative of a lost, noble lineage of Great Lakes passenger steamers that once dominated the culture of the American Midwest. She embodies the physical, traumatic transition from the romantic, wood-dominated era of the early 1900s to the industrial, steel-reinforced future that followed the sobering trauma of the 1930s. To lose the Clipper would be to lose the final, physical evidence of that crucial evolutionary step in American maritime history. She represents the very blueprint of survival we explored at the beginning of our journey. She is a physical, haunting manifestation of the hard-won lessons learned from the fire-blackened tragedies of the past, serving as an eternal reminder that true maritime safety is never an accident, but a deliberate, expensive, and often difficult choice. As we bring this long, reflective journey to a close, standing upon her weather-worn, salt-crusted decks, we are left with a sobering and deeply uncomfortable reflection. We are currently witnessing the final generation that truly remembers the Clipper in her prime, the generation that can still taste the crisp, cold, salt air and hear the faint, lingering echoes of jazz music resonating in her grand ballroom. But when this generation eventually fades into the pages of history, what will truly become of these iron legends? We live in an age of staggering, breathless technological advancement, where modern simulation, 3D modeling, and sterile digital records threaten to make the physical, expensive, and often frustrating preservation of such massive industrial relics seem entirely unnecessary to the uninitiated. In our collective, breathless rush toward the new, the virtual, and the digital, are we perhaps becoming too confident in our own engineering prowess? Have we forgotten the fundamental, humbling lessons about durability, material limits, and the unforgiving, raw nature of the Great Lakes that this ship was painstakingly built to teach us? These iron legends are not merely dead weight clogging our docks, they are our conscience. The question we must face is no longer whether we can afford the fiscal cost to save them, but whether we can afford the spiritual and historical cost of losing the wisdom they carry in their steel hulls. When the last of her rivets finally yield to the inexorable passage of time, will we be left with anything more than a digital ghost of what used to be a living, breathing queen? This is the heavy burden of the Clipper. She demands that we remember who we were, even as we struggle to define who we are becoming, standing as a final, defiant sentinel against the encroaching silence of history. She is a reminder that we are built upon the steel of our ancestors, and that to cast aside their achievements is to lose a piece of our own identity. We must decide if we are a society that values the physical journey, or if we are content with mere echoes in a database. If the Clipper falls, the silence that follows will be the sound of our own indifference, a void where a queen once stood, proving that some legends are not just iron and oil, but the very marrow of our past, demanding to be seen, touched, and understood, lest we forget the price of progress and the true meaning of the word survivor. Finally, Before we conclude today's journey, thank you for honoring this history with me. If these stories resonate with you, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on our next deep dive into maritime lore. Beyond the history, what are your own thoughts on this vessel? Do you feel a personal connection to this story? Or perhaps a different maritime tragedy that has stayed with you? I invite you to share your reflections in the comments. I make it a point to read every single one. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.